Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good evening, everybody. We've got a little heat wave up here again in the Northeast. Hope you're not suffering too much with that if you live up here or wherever you are listening, that your weather is a little bit milder, a little bit more enjoyable, and I trust and hope you've had a good week. We've done a show on animals and whether they, and I hope everyone liked that show. And we're going to touch a little bit about that tonight because a little different take on that, though. We're going to talk about some of the saints that had some love affair and some miraculous things happen with animals in their lives. So there is this love affair that we as human beings have with animals. I was just reading a story where I guess a couple fishermen from Russia, mother bear had a couple cubs and the current got too strong out in this river and she was able to make it to shore, but the cubs couldn't, and the two fishermen rescued them. And pretty good story. So you can check that out on some internet site if you want. But basically what I'm saying is that we have this love affair with animals, and certainly our Lord created them. He loves them, and all of his creation at one day will be restored to the glory that he created it to. And we certainly as Catholic Christians look forward to that day, and we believe that is the key to our faith, the resurrection, of course. Without the resurrection, St. Paul, faith is meaningless. It means nothing. We believe that we will be resurrected and that there will be life eternal and that God's creation will be restored in its original innocence and beauty at the end of time, a new heavens and a new earth. But the saints certainly did have a relationship with animals like we did. You know, one of the things I know is for many, many years that dogs are incredible in the way they can give unconditional love, and that we, that as human beings, lack that in many cases, where dogs, they can be abused, they can not have, let's put it mildly, the best of life from a particular owner, and yet still wag the tail, still love, still being willing to give another chance. So it's a good lesson for us to learn from our animal kingdom friends. But to get on with our stories tonight, we'll start off with St. John Bosco. Now, St. John Bosco, a very well-known Catholic saint, did a lot with the youth. Loved the children, loved the kids, and did so much for street young ladies and boys, and give them dignity and get them involved in the church, and certainly talk about our Lord Jesus Christ. In his life, in that respect, he certainly lived and preached the gospel. And this is an amazing episode in the life of Don Bosco. And he had a lot of ones. This is the one we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. It's the appearance of a dog. It was a huge gray dog that appeared suddenly at moments of danger and reappeared on many occasions and disappeared some years later when the danger was over. Because you got to remember that Italy and many of part of the church history had warring factions, and it was a very difficult time to live in Italy because there was great vindictiveness, and if one family did something egregious to another, there would be that threat of vengeance that we had to one up them, and they in turn would one up them, and back and forth, and you see this circular development of violence that would just keep reoccurring. And they had some tumultuous times. And the dog asked for neither food nor shelter from John Bosco. And here was the key. It was as savage as a wolf against the enemy. but gentle as a lamb with the boys of the oratory, which is the oratory that, of course, St. John Bosco started for them. And St. John gave him the name Gil, meaning gray. So John Bosco once went to a 50-acre quarters right near Valdoco late at night. And it had a bad reputation, this town. It had very shady carriers who could hide behind scrub and the brush and burst upon the passerby to rob them or do them violent harm. And John's mother, Margaret Bosco, was always anxious and nervous when her son was out late at night. And John Bosco had just approached the last buildings in the town when this huge gray dog appeared and walked by his side. Now, Don Bosco was startled at first, but as he found that the creature seemed friendly to him, he kept company and went on to the oratory. The dog turned around and trotted off in the direction whence it had come. And every night since then, henceforward, when Don Bosco was out late, the same thing would happen. The dog would be found waiting for him where he was in a lonely part of town where he had to traverse. So one night, Don Bosco, became aware two suspicious-looking men were following him. And they were matching their pace to his. Now, that's always a bad sign. So when you're out in the street and somebody starts doing that, or crosses the opposite side of the street that you're on and comes to your side, starts doing that, you got to go there. So he did what many of us would do in that situation. He tried to avoid them by crossing the road, and this is what I just mentioned, and they crossed too. Now, he decided to run back, but before he could do that, they were on him. A cloak was thrown over his head, and a handkerchief thrust into his mouth. He struggled to free himself and called for help, but no one was coming, so it was useless. And then suddenly, with a terrific howl, Grigio appeared and rushed upon them. Leaping on the one who held the cloak over Don Bosco's head, he forced him to let go, and then bit the second one, grabbed onto him, and flung him to the ground. Now, the first man tried to escape, but Grigio was after him, rolled him into the mud, and stood over them, growling furiously. "Call off your dog," they cried to Don Bosco. And Don Bosco replied, "I will call him off if you will let me go about my business." "Yes, anything. Just call him off, please." And Don Bosco calmly says, "Come, Grigio." And the dog immediately obeyed, and the two men, terrified now, hit the road. And they got out of there. Got out of Dodge, as they say. Now, another night, Don Bosco was on his way home when a man hiding behind a tree fired twice at him at such close range that it seemed almost impossible that both shots would miss. Then the man, after missing with the shots, he rushed upon Don Bosco. But at this exact moment, Grigio mysteriously appeared and seized the man, and he dragged him a few feet away, growling fiercely all the time. He then released the man, who instantly, like the other two, fled in terror. And once more, the dog walked Don Bosco home. On another occasion, this time, a whole band of thugs. And this time, Don Bosco's mysterious companion once again intervened and saved him. Because Don Bosco had reached a lonely spot, and he heard footsteps. And he turned to see a man close to him with an uplifted stick. Now, Don Bosco was quite a swift runner, but his enemies were swifter, and they caught up with him. And it was a moment of action. So Don Bosco, remember now, we have a tendency to think of priests as not men of action, which is certainly wrong. And we don't want to portray them like that. So he turned to face the man, and what did he do? Well, he threw his punch. So he got that shot. And sent the man spot. But the others now leaped out of the bushes when they saw their companion hurt. and they were also armed with heavy sticks. So now, and contrary to the movies, Don Bosco's in big trouble because he's got several opponents and they're armed. And that is a very dangerous situation for anyone to be in. So once more, at this crucial moment, the terrific call of Grigio was heard, and he ran around and around his master, growling and clacking his teeth and showing those formidable teeth, until one by one the ruffians said, I think we're going to deal with this tonight. And they too disappeared. Now, one night, instead of accompanying Don Bosco, Grigio went to the oratory and refused to let him go out. And he lied down across the door of Don Bosco's room. And for one time, growling and showing ill temper towards Don Bosco when Don Bosco tried to dislodge him. And then John's mother said, "Don't go out, John. If you won't listen to me, at least listen to that dog. He's got more sense than you have." So Don Bosco gave in at last, and a quarter of an hour later, a neighbor came in to warn him they had overheard two rogues planning to attack him. So in this case, Grigio saved Don Bosco by allowing him not to go out that door that night. So we have another incident with Grigio where another evening that after supper, the dog appeared in the playroom of the oratory, and all the boys of Don Bosco's oratory gathered around him and, like all young boys, made much of him. They patted him, pulled his ears, stroked his head. The little ones rode on him. And he regarded them with grave eyes. This is Grigio now. Until at last they brought him into the refectory where Don Bosco was still at supper. And Don Bosco said, "Why, Grigio, old fellow, what brings you here?" And Grigio went up to him, put his great head on the table, looked at him, and wagged his tail. "What do you want, old boy? A bit of cheese or polenta?" And the dog wanted neither. Don Bosco said, if you won't have anything," he said, stroking his head, "then go home to bed." Grigio gave him one long look, turned around, and trotted out. The reason of this unusual visit of Grigio was really never known, but it does show the remarkable gentleness and kindness of this, quote, stray dog, who was nevertheless incredibly vicious and protective of Don Bosco on numerous occasions. And the last time Don Bosco saw him was one night in Castello. He was going from Mirialdo to Moncuco, and it was growing dark. He had to pass by some farms and vineyards that were guarded by savage dogs. And John thought to himself, "I wish I had Grigio here." And as the wish had suddenly produced him, Grigio appeared with every sign of delight at meeting his friend, wagging his tail, and walking the whole way with him. And it was lucky he was there, for the two dogs that were guarding a particular farm they passed rushed out upon them. But Grigio, in a vicious offensive, soon sent both of them flying with their tails between their legs. Don Bosco reached his friend's house to which he was bound. They were astonished to see the magnificent dog and wondered where Don Bosco picked him up. And when they sat him down to supper, he was lying beside them. But when Don Bosco rose to give him some food, he was not to be seen. In fact, that was the last of Grigio. The enemies of the saint had grown tired of plotting against him, and the mysterious protector, Grigio, was never to be seen again. So, how can we explain the incredible timing and actions of Grigio, the stray dog? How is it that he mysteriously showed up at the right moment, on not one, but numerous occasions, to save the life of Father John Bosco? Was Grigio an angel in the form of a dog? If you recall my first episode on the radio show when we started, and my reconversion and what happened to my wife and I at Fatima, and there's a dog story in that, that's what my wife thought of that particular dog in Fatima. So was Grigio an angel? Some people think the animals are. Or was he simply a dog that was mysteriously guided by God to protect Don Bosco? But how then did he seem to appear out of nowhere? One thing is for sure, God was with St. Bosco. He had long ago given himself completely to the service of God And God, as we know, worked incredible miracles through his intercession, that he might be a holy example to all those poor boys who came to the oratory that he had found them, which literally became for them a heavenly refuge. So those children in the town that Don Bosco lived were so blessed, that may have went by the wayside and been lost, but were found. But truly, the saints have this relationship with animals, and there are many, many mysteries, as you know, if you're a follower of the show. And you may have had some interesting experience with our animal friends yourself. And if you'd like to comment or share one, let me give you the number here as we get into the show. It's 515-604-9344, and you'll be prompted to enter an access code of 914-121-pound. So again, if you have any comments on the show tonight or would like to share an experience you may have had, 515-604-9344, access code 914-121-pound. Okay, the next story I'd like to tell you is St. Joseph of Cupertino's influence over the animals. Now, St. Joseph of Cupertino, of course, is noted for his levitation and his flying. And remember, he was considered quite a dunce, but had a truly beautiful heart that God was able to use and bring many people to himself through St. Joseph of Cupertino because of his gentleness and his humility. And so therefore, with that childlike civility, he was able to work great miracles through St. Joseph of Cupertino. And that humbleness and that childlike ability that he had is something that we should strive for, because especially in the divisive age we live right now, humility is the answer to all this pride. It really is. And the more we humble ourselves, the more we show and try and get that great attitude of humility, we're going to see some great things happen in our lives and in our country and in our world. Anyway, what we will say here about St. Joseph of Cupertino is that he always had this little love affair with animals. And for example, once he set free a goldfinch. If you know what those are pretty little birds, and they're really colorful. And this particular bird had been caught in a fowler's net. And St. Joseph said to it, "Go now and enjoy what God has given me. I ask nothing more of you than that you return when I call you to praise me with your God and mine." And off the bird went. So it flies into this garden nearby. And sure enough, when Joseph called it, it would immediately come straight away to praise the Creator. So now we have the story where this hawk that was also in this garden once killed the finch. And this is one, again, which the saint had trained to say, the finch, Jesus and Mary, and also, Friar Joseph, pray your breviary. So that's pretty amazing that St. Joseph had this rapport through the gift of God to be able to train these finches. And again, he trained this particular one to say Jesus and Mary, and also Friar Joseph, pray your breviary. Now, this hawk then killed this particular finch. And St. Joseph was quite upset. And he commanded the hawk to return. And it did. And it flew, and it perched itself nearby. And St. Joseph went up and approached it, saying, "You thief, you've killed my finch, and you deserve that I should kill you." And amazingly, the hawk remained perched on this cage as if it was sorry for its misdeed. And the witnesses state that it even allowed Joseph to strike it with his finger and only flew away when he said, "Now go. This time I will pardon you, but do not do such a thing to a pet again." So that's quite interesting that St. Joseph, again, we're reminded of such saints as Francis and St. Anthony that had this ability to communicate and command animals. Now, the nuns at St. Clare at Cupertino presented a white lamb that was given to them as a discipline to the community. So St. Joseph gives this lamb in order for them to practice this virtue of discipline. And the lamb always was with the nuns during their spiritual exercises and was ever alert in the chapel, and he used to wake them up if they were oversleeping by butting them or jostling them, or remove with hooves and teeth any vain finery which it observed. Now, when the lamb died eventually, the saint promised to send the nuns a bird which would prompt them to love God, and thus it came to pass. One day, as the nuns were reciting the divine office, a forest songster perched on the window of the choir and sang most sweetly with the nuns. And thus, day by day, the merry warble of the feathered songster accompanied and encouraged the chanting of the nuns. Until one day, two novices were quarreling, and it flew between them in an endeavor to part them with its outspread wings and its tiny claws. And one of the novices, unfortunately, struck the bird, and it flew away and did not return. And at this particular time, this particular bird had been with the nuns for 5 years. Now, when word got out to the nuns, obviously they were greatly grieved, and they complained to St. Joseph. You know what he told them? Serves you right. Why did you provoke it and chase it away? That's why it's unwilling to come again, he told them. But the nuns wouldn't let up. And like the woman in the judge in Scripture that she kept on going to and asking the request, they did the same thing to St. Joseph. And he promised to send the bird again. Now, the first summer to choir after he promised, the bird not only came to the window and sang, but had grown more tame than before and flew into the monastery. And it was so tame the nuns were able to tie a small bell to its foot, so they wouldn't know when it would come. So when it failed to appear on Holy Thursday and Good Friday, they again went to Joseph, who replied to them, I sent you the bird that it should sing, not that it should ring a bell. It stayed away because during these days it has guarded the Holy Sepulchre. I will see that it comes back again. And the bird returned once again and remained with the pious nuns until it died. A very, very interesting story. And you know, those finches that I was talking about earlier, I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're beautiful with a really nice yellow body and black wings. A really, really pretty bird. And they have a great call, very great sing-song call that they use. Oh, that's St. Joseph of Cupertino. Quite a saint, quite a saint, showing us and leading the way that anyone is filled with the Holy Spirit and give their lives to God can accomplish great things, because God takes over when we get ourselves out of the way. And this is a hard thing. It's a hard thing for us to do. It certainly is for me. But have the records of saints and the witnesses of saints. And remember, for those, if anyone's listening, or skeptical, or you're skeptical yourself, that many things today are reduced from the supernatural and the miraculous to an area of reason, or, well, if science can't prove it, it therefore can't be real. And our society so blessed with all this technological advance. And remember, we can literally 4 hours a day, 7 days a week, find articles, find news, find stories. And with this, we can slip away, or try to stay with the way of it. The miraculous is certainly the supernatural. So we get back to what the great gift God gave us when he came down from heaven, became one of us, and then died for us. The infinite now touched the finite. And now, for some reason, and many reasons actually, now we want to go back and get rid of the infinite and just have the finite. And that's not a good place for us to be. So remember earlier shows, when we talk about the miraculous and supernatural, that in a lot of these legends, which people like to try and just scoff off, there are elements of truth, and whether that is true, and whether that is in the Garden of Eden or some of the Eucharistic miracles you see today. And one nice thing about the technology today is some of these miracles scientifically are bearing out, and they're being, if you will, proof by science we have today. So there's proof. So we don't want to turn, while we want to be discerning, and we talked about that, we want to be discerning. We don't want to turn away from every spiritual experience or supernatural event that we experience or hear about or can research, because we don't want to become over skeptical. It's good to be discerning. You don't want to fall for everything, but you do, by standing for Christ, want to get that discernment so we can see the supernatural working in the natural world. And believe me, brothers and sisters, it does. Okay, on to our next story. Father Paul Moll, not like the cigarette, M-A-L-L, but M-O-L-L, Paul Moll. And he was known as the Benedictine wonder worker of the 19th century. And he also had some mystical experiences with birds. We're told in his biography that whenever he visited Antwerp, he would call upon a certain invalid lady and her servant, Teresa. Now, in the year 1887, Father Paul told the servant Teresa that she would know beforehand of his approaching visits. At his next visit, he asked, well, have the little birds announced my coming? And as a matter of fact, on the eve of Father Paul's visits to the lady, beautiful little birds, varying in number from 2 to 12 at a time, begin to make their appearance in the garden, singing a joyful song, which is always the same. They would also perch on the windowsill of the drawing room, which looked down upon the garden, and tap on the window pane. Although the tune of the mysterious songsters never varied, they had at each successive visit a different plumage. So they had different coloring each time they came, even though the song was the same. So here we see there's proof that these are the same birds. But look how the supernatural touches this, in that they're singing the same song, but their plumage, their colors are different. Now, not only did Teresa, the servant, see the birds, but also the lady. And neither of them could tell where the birds came from any more than the servant Teresa could, or the birds from the top. But in the case of these delicate little creatures, they would have hardly ventured into our climate in all seasons, for they came in winter, when it was snowing and very cold, as well as the summer. And the nurse tried repeatedly to catch one of the birds, but in vain. And she spoke of it to Father Paul, and he was like, oh, they won't let themselves be caught. And when asked about the beautiful birds, Father Paul replied with a smile, they are my messengers. And Father Paul then warned Teresa not to speak of the birds to anyone except to an intimate friend of hers. He warned, if during my lifetime you spread this news abroad, the birds will never come. And on the eve of Father Paul's death, the birds appeared once more, but they were somewhat dejected this time, and with drooping wings, and sang a melancholy song, which the members of the household understood to be a presentiment of a tragic happening. And now 6 months before the birds returned again, and this took place when a photograph of Father Paul was hung in the invalid's drawing room. And at this time they sang their beautiful melody. But then after that, after Father Paul died, their visits became infrequent. And as I mentioned earlier, the birds appeared each time with a different plumage. Teresa, however, was able to give us a description as the birds appeared on Wednesday, and this was September 30th, 1897, about a year and 7 months after St. Father Paul's death. This is Teresa's words now. Today at 10 minutes to 11, two little birds of incomparable beauty arrived. Their plumage was blue, green, and purple, and their breast and head white, the latter with stripes of deep purple in the form of a garland. How beautiful. How beautiful that must have been. And another lady of Antwerp was favored with a visit from Father Paul. She had 2 small sons who were covered with horrible eruptions which the doctors could not cure. Now, when Father Paul saw the condition of the children, he advised the mother to make a novena. Now, that's, these novenas are usually 9-day prayers said consecutively, and wash both children with water containing the medal of St. Benedict. So they were to make that novena, the mom, and then wash the children with the the medal that contained the water of St. Benedict. Now, Father Paul was the promoter of the medal of St. Benedict and often advised this remedy to those who were ill. Now, perhaps some of you, we don't have time to do that now, but have heard of the Benedictine cross, and it's a very powerful crucifix with a special blessing on it. And it keeps one from evil spirits, and there's many, many, many great graces with this cross. So I encourage you to check into that, the St. Benedictine cross. It's powerful, powerful. Okay, anyway, so he wants mom to do the novena and use that medal with the water of St. Benedict. And the mother was surprised by this advice because she said, the physicians have forbade me to wash them in any water. And Father Paul repeated his advice. I tell you, I want you to wash them 12 times a day for 9 days. So she did it. And by the end of the novena, both children were perfectly cured. And this is, again, one of the miracles worked by Father Paul of Mall, a Benedictine wonder worker of the 19th century. Now, this same woman with the children that used the water that contained the medal of St. Benedict, probably it was a well or something like that, or maybe even a cistern, but with that medal there in the urn or the cistern, that I don't know. But what we do know is that and over the so that is awesome. And I just close the segment here, right? With this some sayings of Paul. The more a man loves God, the more beautiful he grows in the eyes of God. God, being infinite love, he can always love him more and more. O love, O infinite love, O eternal love, O sweet love of God. Man finds his greatest consolation in faithfully keeping the commandments of God and the Holy Church and having a great devotion to Mary. And that's important, especially in the times we were to have that devotion to Mary and pray the rosary. And, these devotions are powerful. Again, we want to really get that spiritual side back in our lives, back in our church, back in our faith, because these things, supernatural, natural, they're linked, and we need to have a spirit-filled prayer life and a spirit-filled church. One of the things I am so happy about, I just segue off this a little bit, is that our parish, because of the bishop or archbishop, has decided to do the St. Michael prayer after every Mass. And that's the one that St. Leo composed when he had that vision of Satan entering the church. So, very, if your diocese, wherever you are, hopefully they're doing this. This will happen out of this. We'll have protections. This is what it's about. The devil's time is running out, and we need to really home in on that spirituality, the spirit. Okay, a couple others, John, with the animals on the show tonight. St. Cuthbert, his day is March 20th. And he lived and died, was born in the year 684, died 687, and he was a Scottish shepherd boy until he was about 15, and he became a monk in Melrose Abbey. And St. Cuthbert decided he would become a hermit, and he began living on Farne Island in a very small cell. And he made friends with what was around him, birds, and he gave them protection, these birds, from hunters, and he shared his meals with them. He's also, an interesting story, a patron saint of otters. And this is because after standing in waist-deep water in the North Sea during his nightly prayer vigils, 2 otters would come and warm his feet. So even him practicing mortification, God is going to still help those who follow him. And while God appreciates that mortification, he also helped out St. Cuthbert by sending him those otters. Okay, well-known saint, St. Philip Neri. His feast day is May 26th. He lived in the from 1515 to 1595. And he's actually kind of unusual because it was later that he became concerned with animals. Now, he's best known as the founder of the oratory movement, and why he embraced vegetarianism on the grounds of animal welfare, not just on the grounds of abstinence. So when he got concerned with animals, he was going in at all tilt. So he once was passing a butcher shop, and he said, if everyone was like me, they wouldn't kill animals. Now, and this is something that today many people become vegans or vegetarians. I tried it for myself for a while because of the animal issue, but it didn't work out so well for me. I don't know if I was doing it wrong, but I really respect those people that can do that, because some of the stuff is kind of brutal. But there's the others that argue that God put these on the planet for our use. But again, like we look at Pope Francis's Laudato Si, there is proper stewardship. There is proper stewardship, and we've got to be aware of that. Anyway, so one of the things he also did was he set captive birds free. And after he would free them, and this is by the bird's own choice, they would not leave them. And many animals were attracted to him. At one time, someone found a young bird in the chapel and brought it to him. Philip told him not to squeeze the bird or hurt it, but to open the window and let it fly away. But afterwards, he worried whether he had done the right thing, as it was so small and it wouldn't know where to go. And on another occasion, he was given a brace of live partridges for a meal, but he also set them free. He would also insist on flies being let out the window instead of being swatted. And he released captured mice, think of this now, into places of safety, and expressed pity for animals on their way to slaughter. And that's what I meant. This is such a personal issue. I know, mice in your house can be a big concern. And they can cause damage. They can cause a cantavirus with their fecal matter. But, again, with that technology, they make live traps now where it's a little more work, but you can live trap the mouse and just remove him and put him in the forest somewhere. So St. Neri would really like to see us be better stewardships of our environment and animals. And, this is not to say, of course, that St. Neri only cared for animals and, didn't really care for humans, because that's a fine line we've got to be, as Catholic Christians, very cautious of. We cannot put the animals above human beings. Well, it's all well and good to have fundraisers and try and save, the abandoned animals or endangered animals. That's awesome. That's doing God's work too. You can't do that when you're going to make a decision on whether there are children or human beings that need that help, and you're going to get it to the animals instead. So we've got to take the priority there. But there's a balance here that can be done, so it can be a win-win situation. That's what we need to do, is pray and do that proper stewardship. So anyway, I mentioned he cared for humans as well, because he saved an ex-Dominican heretic from execution. So St. Neri was the real deal, both in his love for human beings and for animals. And we're going to talk about a Welsh patron saint now of animals, Saint I hope I say this right, Saint Malengo. And she lived in the 600s. And hare hunting used to be a big obsession with the tenant in the Twin Hills. And these hounds of the Prince of Paulus would pursue their prey into bramble thickets and mountains, the fox hunting, things like that. It's pretty brutal. And one time the Prince of Paulus did this, and his hounds chased one of the hares into the thicket. And what did they find? They found a woman praying and giving up to divine contemplation with the hare lying under the fold of her garments. Now, the baying hounds, because if you've ever seen or participated, you know how excited they get. And even they calm down under her influence. And the exasperated prince, well, he had to give up the chase, and then he had to sit and listen to her story of escape and exile from Ireland. Now, this prince became very impressed by her piety and courage, and he made a vow to present her with his lands for the service of God. Now think about that. From hare chasing to now, from this killing of the hare, he is going to give St. Malengo land for God. So this way there would always be a perpetual asylum, refuge, and defense. And Malengo lived there as a solitary for 37 years, after which a church with a shrine was built over her cell. Now, her church remained a place of sanctuary throughout the Middle Ages, and the hares continued to be protected in the parish, which is kind of neat. And the Conservation Society of the Malengo now promotes, you can guess, animal welfare. So a very little-known story, but again, with God, nothing, as we know through Scripture, is impossible. All right. And here's one that, for those who hunt in the audience, I think you may know if you're Catholic, May 30th, and it's celebrated. It's also the feast day, May 30th, of St. Joan of Arc. Now, again, we don't celebrate that here in the United States. They do in France, so this is the beauty of our church. You have these customs, these traditions, and while we're one and we're unified, you also have an acculturation of our culture and tradition, which is so beautiful. Anyway, St. Hubert, 656 to 727. And he lived in the forest as the Ardennes as a hunter. And one Good Friday, when everyone else was at church, he was hunting. And he was pursuing a magnificent stag. And suddenly, as the stag turned around, a crucifix appeared between his antlers, and a voice said, "Hubert, unless you turn to the Lord and lead a holy life, you shall quickly go down to hell." Hubert dismounted his horse and prostrated himself, saying, "Lord, what would you have me do?" And the reply came, "Go and seek Lambert, and he will instruct you." Hubert then went to Bishop Lambert, who became his spiritual guide. Hubert gave all his wealth to the poor and studied for the priesthood, living a holy life, fasting and praying. Eventually, he became a bishop of Liege in 708. Now, St. Hubert later became honored by sportsmen as the originator of ethical hunting behavior, although he renounced hunting after he had his vision. In fact, his hunting life had been seen by God as an unholy life, which would lead him to hell. Now, I'm not saying that hunters are going to hell. From a conservation aspect and from what hunters do, I don't particularly hunt. I used to years ago. It's not something I choose to do now. It's a personal thing. But they are excellent conservationists. They do a lot. A lot of their hard-earned dollars spent go into conservation and programs to save wildlife. And so we're not saying that. But this in particular, St. Hubert's case, there could have been a lot going on there. And this is the way that the Lord reached out to him. But it's an interesting thing. And again, some of the correct myself for a little, because some of the people think he's a patron saint of hunters, and that may be inaccurate. I'm not quite sure about that. But the lesson for us with St. Hubert is that this was his obsession. This was his God, if you will. And that's what we have to be careful of, because it's very, very easy to become so ingrained to a hobby we have, or a sport, or something that gives us enjoyment, where we become to that as an idol in our lives. And that can absolutely lead us in a path to destruction. So here, God, this is his obsession. Who knows what will happen? But we know something from the story. And this is where it's very relevant for our times. And again, we're not saying that people are going to hell here, so I don't want you to misunderstand me there. Because only God knows where people are going. And I'm just going to hold that thought for a minute, because I want to get back to Hubert. But when Hubert, on a Good Friday no less, and prior to my conversion, I did stuff on Good Friday rather than being where I should have been honoring the Lord. He was hunting. So that, again, became his God. And that might have drawn him further and further away into something. Who knows what would have happened? Because God did know, though. Where this obsession with the hunting may have led him, who knows? But it wasn't the hunting itself. It was the idol, the false idol that Hubert had created for him. We see this today, especially in our young children, and with families that are torn between sports on Sunday as a Catholic and going to Mass. And sadly, many times, and this is also with the leagues that do this, or the coaches that have to have some culpability here, because they don't try to change it. And that idol, and there's nothing wrong with sports, so let's, I'm not saying that. Sports is a great thing. It teaches really, really good life lessons to be used later in life. But when it becomes the idol, when it becomes the God, you got trouble. When you start worshiping the people, and there are people who apparently worship the sports or the athletes that play, you're in for a letdown, because we're human beings. And like all human beings, we're going to have trouble with that. So we want to be careful about our idols, because they can get us into trouble, and they can lead us down a deeper path in sin. Because once we replace God and we chase these idols, if our idol, say, is one of lust, and you're married, this can lead you down a path into an adultery. And that's what gets you into trouble. That's what gets you into trouble. Having a balance, moderation and balance in all things is a good thing. If anything, we should have zeal for our Lord and what he did for us and for our faith, and trying to be others to that. But even so, even with that said, sometimes religion can be an obsession, an unhealthy one. And we've also got to watch that. Remember, our Lord has given us 24 hours a day. He's given us a week. And he's given us the time to use it wisely. Again, many things require our stewardship. One of the things in the Garden of Eden, Adam failed not only protecting Eve, he failed in protecting the garden. He failed in his stewardship of Eve as well as the garden, God's creation. So we want to hope and pray we can do a good job in our relationships, our marriages, and with our creation. And at times, of course, because of the nature of original sin, which we fall under, it's very difficult to do. Okay, next, St. Columba. Feast day is June 9th. Again, he lived in 521 to 597. Now, he was a little different because he came from a royal family in Ireland. And then sometime around the year 563, he got into a flimsy boat with 12 monks and set out to sea, unsure of his destination. Now, they landed on a barren island called Iona, and this is off the coast of Scotland, where these monks in St. Columba founded a monastery which would become the virtual center of Celtic spirituality. Now, Columba lived on Iona for about more than 30 years. He copied manuscripts, He made missionary journeys to Scotland, and life on the island mellowed his once fiery temper and replaced it with a calm and gentle spirit. Now, we can all use that. I know I can. And that's important. It's important because the Lord is going to be able to use that and work on that. And the little story I'm going to tell now is taken from Adam of Iona's Life of St. Columba, and tells the tale of a horse's understanding and the impending death of St. Columba. Now, these are his words. After this, the saint left the barn, and going back to the monastery, rested halfway at a place where a cross, which was afterwards erected, and is standing to this day, fixed into a millstone, may be observed on the roadside. Now, while the saint, as I have said, bound down with old age, sat there to rest a little, behold, there came up to him a white pack horse, the same that used as a willing servant to carry the milk vessels from the cowshed to the monastery, same horse. It came up to the saint, and strange to say, laid its head on his bosom, inspired, I believe, by God to do so, as each animal is gifted with the knowledge of things according to the will of the Creator. And knowing that its master was soon about to leave it, and it would see him no more, began to utter plaintive cries, and like a human being, to shed copious tears on the saint's bosom, foaming and greatly wailing. The attendants, seeing this, began to drive the weeping mourner away, but the saint forbade him, saying, "Let it alone. As it is so fond of me, let it pour out its bitter grief into my bosom. Lo, though as thou art a man, and has a rational soul, canst know nothing of my departure. Hence, except when I myself have just told you. But to this brute beast, devoid of reason, the Creator himself has evidently in some way made it known that its master is going to leave it. And in saying this, St. Columba blessed the workhorse, which turned away from him in sadness." Now, for those who have read about the elephant weeping, or more so, may have a animal story, a dog or cat, where one of our loved ones died, and it affected the animal, you can empathize and identify with this. I must tell you, I mentioned my dog died a few years ago, Snowcap, a blue-eyed husky, beautiful animal that was a constant companion of ours. And I must confess, and this was a battle my wife and my dog Snowcap always had, because I had let it, my fault, sleep on this particular chair. So Snowcap obviously thought, well, it's mine. So my wife would battle, kick the dog off. The dog would look around if he wasn't home. I'd come home from work, and she was. You know, not really good on my part. I'll be the first to admit it. But here's the point of my story. When my mother died, and Snowcap and my mother quite well, she sat in that chair, and of course, didn't move for an entire 24-hour period. And this is a husky with loads of energy that I used to work with for, at least an hour a day doing things. A lot of hikes, took her fishing everywhere, literally with me. And what happened then is for a 24-hour period, no water, no food, nothing. Didn't go to the bathroom, just sat there. And just the look on her face was one of just like such grief. I'll never forget it. I can still, as I'm relaying the story, seeing her in that chair. And the next day, she was fine. Some people brush it off, but I don't really buy that. Snowcap and my mother were very close, and she knew that something had changed. And, it was kind of heart-wrenching to see this. So, this is what we have with our companions, with animals. We know many times in the Bible, how God has used animals to aid people, to come to their rescue. We mentioned that with Don Bosco. I've mentioned on the story, it's one I omitted, and maybe some were asking, what about St. Francis and the Wolf of Gubbio. I covered that in a different show, and that's an incredible story, so you can check that out. But I'm going to close up with a St. Roche, and his feast day, August 16th. And he lived in the 1200s. He died in 1327, and he's the patron saint of ailments in dogs. He was born in Montpellier on the French-Italian-Italy border, and was the son of a nobleman and a governor of the city. So many people rejected their wealth in those days to become followers of Christ and become, monks and priests. It's awesome that they give all this up for the Lord. And his mother, this is St. Roche's now, tried unsuccessfully to give birth for many years, but she prayed to the Blessed Virgin Mary to have a child, and St. Roche was conceived. His birth, therefore, was seen to be a miracle, and he had a birthmark of a cross on his breast, which grew as he grew. Now, his mother was a pious woman who had led a holy life, regularly fasting, and the young Roche loyally followed her example of this asceticism. When Roche was 20, both his parents died, and he inherited his father's title and wealth. But like so many others, like St. Francis, he gave away everything to the poor, and he followed the example of St. Francis. And he led that ascetic life, looking after the poor and the sick. And he left for Rome and administered to the sick in the hospitals there and the surrounding towns. Unfortunately, while caring for people with plague in the town of Piacenza, he contracted the disease himself and became very ill. That's the Black Plague now. Remember, we talked about that on a show and how devastating that was and how people questioned God and where he was, because so many religious priests and nuns serving their brothers and sisters had died. Now, as brutal as was the plague, you've got to remember, many bodies were taken by cart, they were burned, they were, terrified of the plague spreading. So even though he was sick and needed care, he was thrown out of the town. And there he went to live in the forest where he obtained water from a spring, but he had no food. Now, no human being, because of the Black Plague, would approach him, and he would have died had it not been for a dog which brought him bread every day and licked his wounds. And eventually, St. Roche recovered and continued his work until he returned to Montpellier, who was thrown into prison by his uncle, of all things, for being a spy. And he died on August 16, 1327, and he was canonized in 1590. So, that reminds me, there's an when we hear the story in the Bible of Lazarus, and, we see with Abraham's bosom. And remember that Lazarus, this beggar, had nothing, and the rich man had everything, but he wouldn't share, he wouldn't give everything. And who gave Lazarus any comfort? It was the dogs. They licked his wounds. And see, a human being would reach out and give him that companionship. It was not, again, using animals to just that and to close those wounds. They had to give Lazarus a much-needed friend. Enough. So animals, do I think that's an important part? Yes, absolutely. There's no two ways about that, in my opinion. Because look at Scripture, we see, even today, where some of the hardest juvenile delinquents, when a dog or a puppy is brought into them, where they're incarcerated in some of these young juvenile homes, no counselor, nothing gets a human being can seem to touch them. That animal can. You see this in my former boss, and how that would brighten their day. So many things are a great mystery, in the supernatural, and we don't really need to have all the answers. What we need to have is love, awesome works, things every creation, bring us closer to Him, to that love, to that Father at first, that He has all His creatures. He has all His creatures. So Let us pray we do it. Good, great, certainly, to love our fellow man as us, and to truly love our God with our heart, mind, and strength and soul.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.